Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. In just a few days, an Indigenous delegation will depart to meet Pope Francis. First Nations delegates have their own private meeting on March 31st. The Assembly of First Nations held a virtual press conference on Thursday to announce their delegates and what they hope to accomplish on the trip. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
Indigenous delegates were supposed to meet with Pope Francis last December, but that got cancelled due to Omicron. High on the agenda is to ask the Pope to come to Canada and apologize for residential schools run by the Catholic Church. But delegation lead Gerald Antoine says when this trip and possible apology will happen remains unknown.
Certainly, our people have endured a lot of things, and they have a sense of hope. They're optimistic about how things will unfold in a good way, and this is one of the things that we're very hopeful that he would come to visit us.
However, Antoine says a visit and papal apology won't be the only things on the menu.
Immediate actions include returning the land properties back to First Nations on whose traditional lands they are situated, investment into long-term healing initiatives beyond the recent commitment of $30 million announced September 27, 2021, to ensure support programs and services for survival and their descendants.
He says delegates will also be asking the Catholic Church to formally renounce the doctrine of discovery. A total of 32 Indigenous delegates will be making the trip to Rome. This includes 13 from the AFN. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A youth delegate from Northeast British Columbia is also traveling to Vatican City next week with survivors and leaders to speak with Pope Francis. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs brings us to Fort Nelson, British Columbia for that story.
Taylor Bain-Takosa is ready to share her truth and the truth of her nation, a long way from her home in Fort Nelson First Nation, British Columbia.
And I still don't like that you're going to the house of ill repute.
I know.
She's a delegate with the Assembly of First Nations, seeking an apology from Pope Francis in Rome this month.
Hope something good comes out of it. My brother, Greg, he's in the back seat of the car. It was a little blue car. And then he's just crying out the window. And me, I'm crying outside because I want to go. Yeah, it was.
Bain-Takosa is Dene, a youth representative attending the trip and an intergenerational survivor of residential school.
And being raised by a single mom, all my aunties and uncles had a hand in raising us. So it was like just seeing them struggle every single day to be proud of who they are, where they come from. Yeah, it's hard. So here's the Bain family, which is my mom's brothers and sisters.
She lives with the effects of residential school every day.
I think for myself, it's like, I can't speak my language. And that's one thing I really wish I could. I am fortunate to have the teachings passed down from my grandparents, but there's a lot that wasn't shared with me just because, my grandparents were terrified that, what if the church was going to come back, or the RCMP was going to come back to get us. So it was always just a balance of, what they could share. Leaving for lower post was exciting because all of my brothers and sisters had gone in previous years, and I was happy to finally be able to go with them. When I got there, it wasn't what I had expected. It was late at night, and we were led into a meeting room with long tables and chairs.
On June 21st, 2021, Lower Post Residential School came crashing down in a ceremonial demolition.
Just hearing their stories of how, the times that they first walked in there to the time that they're standing there watching it being demolished was, you could feel the healing in their voice and hear it. And so I think that, these are the steps. That's just one step we're taking in reconciliation, and this trip to the Vatican is another.
Bain-Takosa says she'll blend her family's story and advocate for youth involvement in healing processes.
I'm hopeful that we are going to hear the words, "I'm sorry," from Pope Francis come next week. And if we don't hear it, we're not going to stop until we do. And so, I think once he hears from, the three of us, the Métis, the Inuit, and the First Nations, that he's gonna be compelled to say those exact words.
An apology she hopes for her family, her nation, and Indigenous people across the globe to hear. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Fort Nelson First Nation.
Thanks, Charlotte. Well, during her bail hearing, Tamara Lich, an organizer of the freedom protests in Ottawa, claimed she's Métis. Since then, there have been many questions around her Indigenous heritage. Now she's set the record straight with proof. Tamara Pimentel has this update.
As racist.
When Tamara Lich claimed Métis ancestry, many questioned her.
As a woman with Métis heritage,
it prompted 2 genealogists to look into her background, and they couldn't find any Métis family members. And that blew up on social media. But it turns out that this genealogy is based off of Lich's adoptive family. Now APTN has obtained a copy of Lich's Métis Nation of Alberta card and certificate from January 2019, proving that she does have a Métis background. Lich's lawyer requested APTN doesn't show the copy of her card in our broadcast. The reason her Métis claims caught so much attention: if the court accepts that Lich is Indigenous, she could be entitled to a Glad-You report, which details her life and could be used by a justice at sentencing. In an affidavit, Lich stated that she was born in Saskatchewan, adopted by a Caucasian family, and her biological maternal grandmother was Cree and biological maternal grandfather was Métis. Lich was granted bail on March 7th. She is facing multiple criminal charges, including mischief. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
They are using you.
And you can find much more on that story over on our website, aptnnews.ca. Well, APTN is also off to the Vatican. Here's Tina House.
Tanse, I'm Tina House. Soon I'll be traveling to Rome, Italy with the Indigenous delegation to meet the Pope regarding truth and reconciliation and residential schools and the impacts of those schools on our people. Tune in next week for more stories on APTN National News.
Welcome back. Quebec tabled their provincial budget this week, and it's their last before heading into an election later this year. The good news, unemployment is down and the economy is surging. But with the cost of living rising, will First Nations communities have enough government support to address post-pandemic concerns? Lindsay Richardson takes a look.
C'est le budget de votre gouvernement. C'est votre budget.
Bravo!
It drew a standing O in the National Assembly, but the 2022-2023 Quebec budget was status quo for Indigenous affairs. They'll get $285 million over 5 years, but have only $34.7 million to spend in 2022, with small increments over the next 4 years.
It's really up to the First Nation to tell us what the priorities are, and not for the finance minister to say this.
But another announcement set tongues wagging. Quebec will dole out a one-time tax benefit of $500 per person to offset high cost of living.
The inflation is exceptional, so the compensation is exceptional.
Finance Minister Eric Girard says anyone over 18 making under $100,000 a year is eligible, as long as they file a tax return in 2022. According to Revenue Quebec, First Nations and Inuit are eligible because they're not technically exempted from filing Quebec taxes, saying in an email, people even with little or no income have every interest in filing a return to benefit from tax credits. Experts say $500 won't tip the scales too far.
So instead of addressing those who are really affected by inflation, you're just giving out these checks to increase short-term consumption, but you're really not addressing the issue.
A reported 6.4 million people are eligible for this tax benefit. Opposition leaders say it's money that could be redistributed elsewhere. Although Quebec invested heavily in education this year, the Kativik School Board, which serves the Inuit of northern Quebec, told APTN just before the budget was tabled they could use all extra funding available.
I would buy lots of vehicles such as water trucks, sewage trucks, school buses. Even if they give me $1 million, I would finish them in a day because there's so much to buy. We lack housing. Our schools are very old. They need renovations. So, yeah, we need fundings.
Girard says he's aware of the needs of Indigenous communities.
We hear the demand, and the demand for this budget, like for all previous budget, exceeded many times the amount of money that we could allocate.
Investments in other areas will affect Indigenous people by proxy, like the investment to rejig cold cases involving missing persons, or investments in air travel from remote regions. As for the specific fundings, Girard says Quebec will continue consulting with communities on use through the Indigenous Affairs Ministry. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
The Saskatchewan Party also unveiled their budget this week in Regina. It contains a 20% increase in funding for First Nation and Métis organizations. But it's being met with criticism from the opposition and from agencies working for the province's most vulnerable. APTN's Leanne Sanders reports.
The government is touting its spending plan, which will see a $463 million deficit. The budget includes $233 million for First Nations and Métis initiatives, but they're spread across a number of different ministries for things like gaming, duty consult initiatives, career training, on-reserve policing, Indigenous post-secondary programs, the Métis Addictions Council, and alternative justice. $114 million is also earmarked to increase Saskatchewan income support payments. They go up by $30 per month, and shelter benefits, $25 per month. Saskatoon shelters estimate more than half their clientele is Indigenous, and the NDP's Mira Convoy says the increase does nothing to help families live.
These pitiful tweaks just aren't solutions. As desperate as that minister is for a good news story, this isn't that. This will go no distance to providing relief for the struggling people coming out of a pandemic, Mr. Speaker. $1 a day.
The budget does not contain funding for shelters for women and children dealing with domestic violence or direct funding for safe drug consumption sites. Prairie Harm Reduction's Executive Director, Kayla DeMong, says a comprehensive strategy for the vulnerable is still needed.
We know that in our province we have the long-standing intergenerational effects of colonialism that are still existing today. Our systems and our policies really aren't created or built to bring Indigenous people up and to empower them. And we're dealing with, ongoing overpopulation in our justice system, in our correction system, in our child welfare system. And these are all layers of things that then put people in situations where substances are a coping mechanism for all of these traumas that are being created.
Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Meanwhile, Canada says it will increase spending on the military. That coming today from the Prime Minister. Justin Trudeau is in Belgium for meetings with NATO and G7 leaders. Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine is obviously front and center. Trudeau says Canada will enforce sanctions against more than 100 wealthy Russians. But he's under international pressure to increase Canada's military spending at home and for NATO. Here's some of what he had to say.
Over the past number of years, we've put forward ambitious increases in spending for NATO as part of our strong, secure, engaged commitment of a few years ago. We continue to step up in our capabilities and our commitment to NATO in Central and Eastern Europe and elsewhere around the world, and we will continue to be increasing our defense spending.
And of course, the Prime Minister is in Brussels speaking to NATO and G7 leaders. We just heard from him there, where he also announced Canada will be sanctioning more Russian officials close to President Putin to make them feel the financial pain for launching their invasion.
The world has come together to impose unprecedented and punishing sanctions on Putin and his enablers. Today, Canada will be increasing pressure by sanctioning 160 members of the Russian Federation Council who facilitated and enabled this unjustified invasion, which brings the total of individuals connected to Putin who've been sanctioned by Canada to 964.
The Prime Minister also said Canada will be providing $50 million to various humanitarian organizations to help them support the refugees fleeing Ukraine. Time for another quick break, but first a look at a story we're working on about an Indigenous organization moving into a new space and what they believe is underneath.
I'm Chris Stewart. The Nietzsche Institute Center of Indigenous Learning has had to move to a new space, and they believe that space is located on unmarked graves, as this whole site was once the Edmonton Indian Residential School.
I've had elders tell me personally, that our trailers are sitting on unmarked graves here. We need to find a new home for Nietzsche. We need to get out of here and be treated with an honorable respect.
This story coming on tomorrow's APTN National News.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Eric Tatusa sent in this photo from Cordova Bay in Victoria, British Columbia. Eric really seems to capture the calm and tranquility of the shoreline in this shot. Thanks for sending it in, Eric. Email your pictures of pets, family, nature, the land, your culture, or crafts to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. And don't forget to say where you took the picture. Now let's take a look at Friday's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 9 with showers in Halifax, 5 with rain in Fredericton, 0 in Kuujjuaq and Happy Valley, Goose Bay, 7 in Montreal, +2 with snow in Chibougamau, 5 in Sault Ste. Marie and North Bay where snow is expected, +4 with snow in Thunder Bay, +1 in Sioux Lookout. -9 in God's Lake, 6 below for Norway House and the Paw, +3 with snow in Winnipeg and Gimli, 5 in Dauphin, +2 in Regina, -2 in Saskatoon, -3 in Meadow Lake, 7 below in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, -6 in Fort McMurray, +1 in Grand Prairie, +9 in Lethbridge, 1 above in Edmonton, 12 and cloudy in Vancouver, 11 for Victoria, 5 and cloudy in Prince George, +4 with snow in Dease Lake, -10 in Old Crow, +4 for Whitehorse, -20 in Yellowknife, 14 below in Norman Wells, -26 in Sax Harbor, -23 for Paulatuck, -17 and snow in Chesterfield, 28 below in Cambridge Bay, -27 in Joe Haven, -21 in Igloo Lake. Well, now to a definite sign of spring. Boo the grizzly bear is seen emerging from his den for the 20th year in a row. The longtime resident of Kicking Horse Mountain Resort's Bear Refuge in Golden, BC was caught on camera poking through the snow. Well, Boo, we all know exactly how that feels. What a long winter it's been here in Winnipeg. An art center in the Yukon has commissioned a one-of-a-kind snow sculpture for an exhibit. And while it might not be obvious at first glance, a meaningful piece of First Nations artwork is the inspiration behind it. Here's Sarah Connors with that story.
It takes a lot of snow, chiseling, and shoveling to transform a 10-foot tall block of snow into a work of art. For the last few days, these snow carvers have been shaping snow into an eye-catching sculpture, a kraken's tentacles intertwined with a float plane. And there's First Nations meaning behind this piece.
It represents when we're taken and brought back by a float plane.
The sculpture was originally based on this float plane carving by Kaska artist Dennis Shorty, which is on display at the Yukon Art Center. As a child, Shorty was flown by float plane from his community of Ross River to residential school in Lower Post in northern BC.
I put numbers on it in letters. I put LP for low post and 282, that's my name. Residential school, yeah. So that's what they're carving of.
Shorty says he struggled for many years with the trauma of residential school and his mother being murdered. He says the piece is a representation of struggle and perseverance.
It's just to show people out there that you could persevere no matter what comes your way.
The snow sculpture was commissioned by the Yukon Art Center and Whitehorse as part of the Yukon Permanent Art Collection's Collective Memory exhibit. Sculptor Michel Gignac was intrigued by the piece and chose it from the gallery to recreate, but he wanted to do something different.
That was kind of the initial, that would be so cool to do a float plane, and then how we can tie it in so that, because it's really hard to do flying planes. So how you can make a little bit of a story with the float plane.
Gignac says it's up to the viewer to interpret the message.
I guess it's just to create more story, kind of more for people to read into.
Teslin Tlingit artist Ken Anderson is assisting with the sculpture. He says hopefully it will inspire people viewing the exhibit to learn more about First Nations history.
You know, obviously that school down in Lower Post is gone now, but it's kind of about the memory, right? I mean, kind of like this piece, it'll be gone. It won't last too long, but it's like that, but it was still here, you know, so the memories are still there, right?
I would like to see it. We know those two too, so.
Shorty says he plans on traveling to Whitehorse to see the sculpture next week. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Beautiful stuff. The latest episode of Nation to Nation is just moments away. Here's host producer Brett Forrester to tell us more about the guests he'll have on the show.
Thanks, Dennis. Coming up, I'll examine the new Liberal NDP governance pact with 2 Indigenous MPs. Jaime Métis is the Liberal Parliamentary Secretary for Crown Indigenous Relations, and Blake Desjardins is the only new Democrat House member from Alberta. I'll get their take on what the deal could mean for Indigenous people. But first, there's been some new developments in Northern Ontario's proposed Ring of Fire mega project. I'll speak with one chief whose community is close to the area about how he wants to see it proceed. That's in just a few minutes on Nation to Nation.
Thanks, Brett. Another stunning tie there. You can catch Nation to Nation right here in less than 2 minutes. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. For news anytime and more on anything you've seen here, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Stick around. Brett is next with Nation to Nation. Have a great night.